I feel like if you were to ask any of the Bayverse collectors what their most sought after figure were, or just Studio Series collectors in general, I feel like one of the tops one would definitely be Ironhide. Because let's face it, Ironhide came out relatively early in the grand scheme of things, and he's also one that never really got a re-release unless you're talking about the 15th anniversary pack. But of course, that's not an individual release. So he has become very sought after, to say the least. And let's be honest, this does cause a lot of hassle, because a lot of people do want an Ironhide, especially if they're a Bayverse collector, because he is probably one of the more iconic characters that actually came out of the movies. I'm gonna be honest though, I'm actually very surprised that Hasbro hasn't re-released him individually, because the 15th anniversary pack is off of the market, and it's definitely been a while since Studio Series 14. And honestly, I'm really surprised, because I would have thought it definitely would have been in next year's re-releases, because they are re-releasing a lot of highly sought after figures next year. But they're not doing Ironhide, so I'm actually really surprised, like I keep saying. But obviously, all of that into consideration, and along with the fact that the only re-release is because of the 15th anniversary pack, has led to an absolute monster of an aftermarket price. But is he actually worth that? So let's actually take a look at it, because here he is, this is Ironhide, and I actually recently got him for a fairly decent price. And the robot mode, I have to say, is absolutely stellar. And this is his initial release as Studio Series 14 and not the 15th anniversary pack. And I'm going to be honest, you can mainly tell by the paint apps. You can see the toes aren't as chromed out, you can see the legs haven't got that big bit of grey, and also his eye is also painted in, because for some reason the 15th anniversary one isn't painted, which is very strange. But I will say, other than that, the deco on this is absolutely amazing. The consistent black is absolutely amazing looking, and where there is paint, it does look amazing, apart from the front lights. Because let's be honest, this is a fairly universal problem when it comes to the Ironhide Studio Series figure. For some reason, that orange paint is just chipped on every single Ironhide I've ever seen online, including mine. So, it's a fairly universal experience that I wish wasn't the case, but it is no matter which one you seem to get. But apart from a lot of silver dotted out around the figure itself, the main bit of paint definitely is on the head. And while we're on the head, it is absolutely amazing looking. It is so good, and it's completely bang on to how the actual model looks in the movies. And I think it's the first official Ironhide that doesn't have the concept art battle mask over it. I will say this is thankfully also a Voyager class, which Ironhide definitely needed, because I know there are deluxe versions of Ironhide. I know a lot of people actually will say for scaling, which I will get to, I know a lot of people do think scaling wise, the Hunt for the Decepticons Deluxe is the best one for you, but honestly, a deluxe class just simply doesn't fit Ironhide. But I will say, he is probably a little too big, and I know this completely goes against what I was just saying, but it is still the case. Because that's the thing, in the grand scheme of things, scaling wise, he does do fairly well, but there is the odd character that I do think he's a bit too tall for, and that mainly for me is probably Optimus. Because let's be honest, while he does look fantastic with Prime, he does seem to be a little too tall, especially when you compare them in the movies. And of course, Hasbro does have the whole brand unification, everything scales with each other idea now, so it's a bit weird to see that he's a little too tall. But I will say, the size definitely does become more of a head thing when it comes to the vehicle mode as well. Because, spoiler, the truck is definitely too big. But that definitely just doesn't take away from the fact that he is so striking looking. And the size really does merit the sheer bulkiness and the strength that Ironhide does have. Because like I said, it is just striking looking. He really does have a presence. I've stood him up against a lot of my other Studio Series figures, and he does just have a habit of standing out no matter who he's with. Even when he's against characters like Megatron and Starscream, he just has that presence about him. I will say as well, this is definitely the Ironhide figure that has the most consistent chest, because I do think that some of the Ironhides that have come before now have definitely had a problem when it comes to the chest. I mean, the Dark of the Moon Voyager, the chest just didn't want to stay in place and it was just very weird. I can't say much for the Dark of the Moon Leader, I never really had that one, but of course it's got that Gatling gun gimmick, so maybe it was solid enough. But I will say, I do know that the movie Masterpiece just had a habit of having it crumble before you, so it is nice to see that this Ironhide chest is very well put together and it is solid. But I will address it, I do know a lot of people do have a problem with the bumper just being sat there. I know some people wish it did have some hinge joints on the outside, so it could at least curl in a little bit. But I'm gonna be honest, I don't really see much of a problem when it comes to the bumper. I do think it's quite nice, but I do get why people have a problem with it because it can stand out. But speaking of stand out, man, those accessories, those cannons are absolutely amazing. They're painted perfectly, they look just fantastic. They're one for one with the movies, I gotta say. And they just have a presence about them, they really do. And I can appreciate the fact that the weapons also have those panels on them, so it does look like they fully came out of his arms. It's just a nice attention to detail that I can really appreciate. And those cannons, man, they really do stand out in terms of the posing. It just looks amazing. And I will say, let's actually get into the posing, because in the grand scheme of things, he can pull off the Ironhide poses quite well, but haha, 2018 early studio series, it does suffer in a fair few ways. I will say the main thing is probably that in some instances, I will find that his feet aren't the most stable, but that's probably down to the fact that they're naturally on this like incline because he doesn't have an ankle tilt. So they do have the natural little curve in his feet, but the problem they then have is the fact that the wheels are actually on the bottom of his feet and they're just sat straight. So it does just lead to these inconsistency with the plastic, and it does mean he does have stability issues from time to time. But he does still stand fine. I've never had an issue where I've placed him down and he just immediately falls over. But if you're not careful, he could fall over if you're not fully with it. But I did mention the ankle tilt, so let's actually just look at the posability. His head is on a ball joint and it does do fairly well. The panels do, or his chest specifically, can limit it a fair bit, but he does go about as far as you need him to. And he does then have most of what you would expect apart from that. The arms have full articulation, he does have a wrist swivel, which is nice, and it really does add to the posability. He doesn't actually have a waist swivel, which is a shame. But again, haha, early studio series. And his legs does have everything that you want, again apart from the ankle tilt. So like I said, it does just stink of that early studio series feel, but he does still get the pose that you want him to, aka the Ironhide cannon poses. But that's basically it when it comes to the robot mode. I don't know what else to really say about it apart from the fact that it does what it needs to do, and it does it fairly well. But the problem is that those little extras are definitely missing. But I do think there's not much more you could really do for it. Like, ultimately, yes, you could just slide a pin into his feet and you could have an ankle tilt. But ultimately, it is what it is. Ironhide isn't exactly the most dynamic of characters, but it's definitely something that should have been in this figure. But I'm not losing sleep over it. But let's actually just get into the vehicle mode. Well, technically before the vehicle mode, but also the vehicle mode is the transformation. And I will say, it is fairly simple. I know a lot of people do have a problem with the panels for the chest, because it is a lot of, as long as it's in the right position, it's fine. But still, it needs to be in the right position, otherwise it's just not going to go. But ultimately, I do think it's a very satisfying transformation. The legs are fairly simple, but the chest as well, once you get the hang of those panels, it's fairly good. But good god, is that an amazing looking vehicle mode. Honestly, I think it is one for one with the actual truck from the movies itself. This is strangely one of those figures that I look at and I really don't have any sort of downsides to it. Of course I did mention the scaling and I'll show that a bit better in a second. But ultimately, apart from that, in its own little vacuum, it does exactly what it needs to do. And like I said, it looks basically one for one. I will say, weapon storage wise, it does just have the cannons on the back of the truck, and it does look quite fine in the grand scheme of things. It almost looks like the Stealth Force from the Dark of the Moon video game, but it's not obviously intending to be that. But it still somewhat looks like it, so you could probably just squint your eyes and think of it like that. But personally speaking, I don't display it with the cannons on it. But ultimately, it does still have that option for you. But let's finally look at it. Let's look at the scaling. I mean, it is too big. Like, it shouldn't be anywhere near the size of what it is, especially compared to Optimus. The Peterbilt is not smaller than Ironhide, let's be honest. But like I said, in a vacuum it is completely fine. It's just one of those things that I do look at and I go, damn, that sucks. But ultimately, I don't personally display my Transformers in vehicle mode, so it's something I'll probably just forget about. But ultimately, it is still a factor that I have to consider when looking at this figure. But again, it's not something that bothers me, but I know it is something that a lot of people don't like the look of. But like I said, other than Optimus, I mean, he does scale very well. He looks amazing with Bumblebee. I do think Bumblebee is a little too small, but again, that just come down to the fact that Ironhide is simply too big, because Bumblebee and Prime scale perfectly with each other. It is just Ironhide that's a little too big. But like I said before, in my opinion, this then doesn't justify when people say that you should just go for the Hunter for the Decepticons Deluxe, because then he is definitely just too small, and he just doesn't scale properly with any of the characters, so he's still the best option in the grand scheme of things. But that about is it when it comes to Ironhide, and let me know what you guys think of this figure, because honestly, I really do like it and I understand why it's heavily sought after. But the problem is that do I recommend it for the godforsaken aftermarket prices? And honestly, wait for the right deal, I guess. Like, the problem is that there are some people who are on eBay who expect you to throw their house at their Ironhide figures, and don't do that, please. I will say, I got mine for just above retail, so it is worth it in that sense. And like I said, if you could get it for a similar pricing, definitely do it. I would say if you're desperate for an Ironhide, I would say the most you should realistically spend on it is nothing more than £50 or £60. But if you can justify any higher than that, then good on you, but personally I wouldn't have been able to. But like I said, he is just an absolutely amazing figure, and it's definitely one that needs a re-release. Honestly, I'm very surprised they haven't done what they've done with a lot of Ironhides, which is release him in the red G1 colours. But I do think that's probably something they would take advantage of if they did it nowadays. But ultimately, I think the Ironhide mold is a bit too far behind him now. But like I said, that is my look at Ironhide, and let me know if you do want to see other Bayverse reviews like this. But other than that, guys, thank you for watching, take care, okay,